Okay.
Today we are thrilled to have with us Dr. Dana Robert, who is the Truman Collins Professor of World Christianity and History of Mission and Director for the Center of Global Christianity and Mission at Boston University School of Theology. Dana has been involved at OMSC for many years. She's well known in the field of mission history and the field of intercultural studies and world Christianity, one of the founders of that field. And she is well known for her writings, especially the now classic American Women in Mission, a social history of their thought and practice, but several other very important volumes. And I will refer those back to Dana if she wants to talk about those. But Dana, we welcome you today warmly. And we want to ask you, begin by asking you how you got involved at OMSC.
Well, Tom, first let me say hello and greetings to all supporters of OMSC. I've always called OMSC my home away from home, as many people have, starting back in the 1980s when I became a contributing editor to the IBMR. That was my initial involvement with the OMSC. And I was recruited there by Dr. Gerald Anderson, who really built the OMSC into what it is today. He was a visionary leader, and he was a dogged and stubborn recruiter of talent to the IBMR and built it into the highest circulation English language periodical in mission studies. And he did that at a time, remember, before you could get information online, before the internet. And so people went to the IBMR to hear about analyses of the latest conference on mission theology, the latest meetings on mission studies, cutting edge research that opened up many areas. And Dr. Anderson shepherded all of that. So I started by my involvement with the IBMR, and I have continued to be a consulting editor now for several decades.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Another place where I got involved early were the January seminars for seminarians. Now, again, remember, pre-internet, when people were doing all these short-term mission trips, and before people weren't getting mission studies in their seminary training necessarily. So when the OMSC moved to New Haven, it contracted with the Mercy Center, a beautiful retreat center run by the Sisters of Mercy on the Atlantic Ocean. And in January, over a period of several weeks, seminary students and interested others who were either considering becoming missionaries or were interested in world Christianity and related subjects would go for week-long retreats. And there was a rotating cast of faculty. So I started teaching in those seminars for seminarians, tremendously enjoyed it, had wonderful conversations with up-and-coming generations. That was at the time before a lot of schools were running J terms or interim terms. So at that moment in history, again, for about 20 years or so, that January seminar for seminarians was a really important contribution of the OMSC to training the next generation.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you mentioned Dr. Anderson, and you were also very involved in the Pew funded Research Enablement Program, which was launched actually, I believe, in the late 80s, but then it was given final funding in 1992, and it ran all the way to 1999. It was a long standing project. How were you involved in the REP, as it was called?
Yes, well, let me say also that the REP background is connected to Gerald Anderson pioneering scholarly projects while being director of the OMSC and editor of the IBMR. So, for example, he did the Biographical Dictionary of Christian Missions as a OMSC project, in effect. So that was a natural fit when people were starting to explore what we now call world Christianity. Gerald Anderson, with his global connections, and the OMSC were a hub of conversation around this emerging discourse of what we now call world Christianity. So Dr. Anderson worked with Joel Carpenter, who was then head of the religion section of Pew Charitable Trusts. And in the late 80s, they launched a project called Seismic, Scholars Initiative on, missions and so on, to do the lay of the land and figure out what was going on. It had a library component. What do we do about library resources? How do we resource this? They called together about 18 scholars, plus the leaders were Dr. Andrew Walls and Steve Peterson, who was in library, head of the Day Missions Library, to start looking at what do we need to do to upscale and integrate mission studies into the broader academic discourse. That was called Seismic. It was a pilot project. After Seismic, and I was one of the 18, the youngest of those 18. After that, then Pew Trust put millions of dollars into funding, again, not yet called world Christianity, into mission studies and global mission scholarship. And so OMSC was one of the legs, the several legs of the tripod of what became this massive project in world Christianity. The OMSC and REP, with Gerald Anderson as the head, were tasked to give out the individual research grants to individual scholars who applied. So I was on a small committee that worked through the 1990s. It included Paul Hebert, Mary Mott, Jose Miguez Benino, John Poby, David Kerr, Dan Bays, Bob Frickenberg. Together, we represented an interdisciplinary committee that read hundreds, if not thousands, of applications from individual scholars, selected some every year, and then held seminars in Nashville where they attended and we attended, where scholarly conversations started leading to this aha moment where it became clear we were collaborating in a joint enterprise. So scholars that thought of themselves as totally alone would get this money and come to this several day seminar and be conversing with people in other fields, but who also had a local, global, theoretical matrix. Now remember, this is a time when secularization was the grand narrative of sociologists and religious studies scholars. And here were people who thought they were all alone studying the emergence of Christianity somehow in a place it hadn't been before, or reinterpreting the history to be more global. So out of that, the REP program was the OMSC contribution to several big pieces funded by Pew Charitable Trusts, that by 1992, the term world Christianity started to be used. Now, I went back and looked at the title of all of the successful REP grants administered by the OMSC. Not one of them used the term world Christianity. This was prior to that discourse. One of them used the term world church. So you see, early 90s to mid to late 90s, there's a growing scholarly conversation of which the OMSC was a hub. And by around the year 2000, you start to see the term world Christianity proliferating. And then as soon as it begins to proliferate, all the publishers want to publish a textbook in global or world Christianity. So the book, once the book publishers get into it and you start getting textbooks in the early 2000s, you know, you've arrived as a field, right? Or a scholarly discourse.
Wow.
But without the global connections of OMSC, particularly led by Gerald Anderson and his vision and his scholarly capacities, the field of world Christianity would not have developed the way it did.
Wow.
The OMSC was central to that through this REP program. By giving the grants to individual scholars, we created the field as it first existed.
Mm. You know, OMSC has been a unique place to gather together scholars, as you've mentioned, and also people, practitioners. You know, as the mainline churches and even the evangelical mission thrust began to peter out a little bit, at least in terms of the feedback that was coming back to the North American churches. Suddenly, we were welcoming at OMSC, that is, people from Africa and Asia and Latin America and other parts of the world, the Middle East and Oceania, who were going across cultural and national borders to share the gospel. And this is a different story than the 19th century, the great 19th century mission movement of the mainline churches and the Catholic Church as well. But how would you reflect on this interface at OMSC between practitioners and scholars? What would you say about that?
That's a great question, and I can see transitions and developments that at the time you don't see them, but you're in the middle of transitions. Let me just talk about two things here then. One is that when R. Pierce Beaver had started a secret meeting once or twice a year for the heads of evangelical mission agencies who needed scholarly resourcing. Now, Gerald Anderson continued that. It had no name. You weren't allowed to talk about it because it had to be a safe space for conservative mission leaders to be frank about what they were seeing. Mm. So the OMSC became a place for these twice a year. I think it's now later was called the Mission Research Forum or something like that. But the heads of evangelical mission agencies would come and study together a scholarly issue. So I remember in the 1990s, as Pentecostalism is growing and conflicting with Catholicism, and the Pope comes down against Pentecostalism in Latin America in 1989 or whatever, this group got papers from Catholic scholars to talk about Pentecostalism. Wow. You know, so it was cutting edge issues. So that's one place. I want to point out that usually it was a theme, but about 3 times Jerry and the committee chose one book to have for the whole weekend. Mm-hmm. One of these was David Bosch's Transforming Mission. Right. So I was one of several respondents to that, and we got the first 100 copies of Transforming Mission as it came off the press. Now, you can imagine being young. In 1991, I was pretty young, and getting this thick tome, and so I'm supposed to respond to this. I mean, it was just so overwhelming. Yeah. So David Bosch came, and we had our weekend with that, you know, incredible, monumental piece of scholarship. Yeah. So I would go to this occasionally because they would pull in scholars to fit whatever the theme. I was also very honored when my book, American Women in Mission, was chosen as a standalone discussion for conservative mission leaders in around 1997. Mm. So there was a lot of teaching behind the scenes to mission leaders. Mm. That's one of the things the OMSC was doing. Wow. Another thing is this interface of missionaries and increasingly global clientele. Mm-hmm. Over the 35 years or so that I've been associated with OMSC, of course, the percentage of Western missionaries decreased and the number of global missionaries increased. So you could see the very changing identity of world Christianity happening in microcosm at the OMSC. That's right. And Jerry Anderson had been a missionary in the Philippines, so he always brought in, there was an early strong group, Myanmar, Burma, the Philippines, a big strong Southeast Asia. But this starts to internationalize more and more. So you get more people from Korea and India and, you know, other places. Yeah. And really, I think by the time John Bonk became the head of the OMSC, this was an established transition. It's not that the people were no longer missionaries, they're just not Western missionaries. So I spent 9 years as head of the program committee on the board. Mm-hmm. And the programs then that John Bonk initiated were more oriented toward the global church than toward the Western missionary identity. Mm-hmm. So I would say by the time Dr. Bonk became head of the OMSC, that transition to global had really occurred. And the two programs that I'm proud of that we worked on while I was on the board, first was the Artist in Residence program. Yeah. John Bonk brought the first artist, and we decided, you know, that's a whole aspect of relating to the world church that's not been happening anywhere. Mm-hmm. And John Bonk then and our program committee, we launched this Artists in Residence program. The first one was a friend of John's, Ray Dirks, who's usually not even counted in the group because he was before we formalized the program. Mm-hmm. But this brought artists, especially from Asia. Mm-hmm. So that was one thing. And if you just think about how many of those paintings that the people did while they were at OMSC are on the covers of books now, on the upper room, on the walls of places as a kind of the explosion of global art in world Christianity. That global project, bringing those artists to the U.S., was one of the big globalizing things the OMSC did that had ripple effects were just throughout North America, especially. Yeah. A second project then that John Bonk was initiated that was oriented toward the global church is the Dictionary of African Christian Biography. Mm-hmm. And John Bonk had been part of that seismic group in the late 1980s. And I remember when we were having a discussion of all of us advising, a very well-meaning mission person stood up and she said, "Why are we wasting our time on scholarship? People are going to die without Jesus Christ. Do we really care about documenting the scholarship of mission? We should be out there evangelizing." And I'll never forget John Bonk, who was then not yet at OMSC, said, "If there had been no Luke, we would have never heard of Paul. Somebody has to be Luke, which is to document the mission and the growth and the meaning of the church in any given time and place." So when we started the Dictionary of African Christian Biography, John named it the Project Luke, which was to say, and we got Project Luke scholars to come to the OMSC to work on documenting this explosive growth of Christianity in Africa. Mm-hmm. We focused on biographies. You know, when you're trying to start scholarship, what do you start with? You can't be writing full-blown church histories, but what you can do is say, hey, who are the leaders who are planting churches? Who are the leaders who are starting things? And so it started by trying to document, to collect biographical information on African Christian leaders so that 100 years from now, when people look back at this vibrant African Christianity all over the continent, they have some idea who were the Africans engaged in this. So the DACB and the Artists in Residence programs are the two that I think I was proudest of during the 9 years I spent as chair of the program committee at the OMSC. And both of those projects have had international ripple effects around the world in terms of shifting the OMSC also to being facing globally.
Mm-hmm.
We have not lost our focus on mission.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a richer, broader, to and from everywhere definition of mission. It's no longer narrowly focused on the Western church in mission.
Indeed. Indeed. Thank you. That's wonderful to hear. You'll be happy to know that the Artist in Residence program has been resurrected from my first year in 2016. And we are planning to keep it going and maybe even expanding it to include musicians and literary artists as well as visual artists. So we do hope to continue to have that kind of voice. Also, and perhaps even more importantly, looking forward, I have heard from so many people in the Western Academy who work on world Christianity and mission studies and intercultural theology, and complaining about the paucity of real hard information. You mentioned, the Dictionary of African Christian Biography, but real hard information about what's going on in the churches in parts of Asia, what's going on in the churches in Oceania and all across Africa, of course, and in the Middle East and Latin America. So there's this great gap, as you know, linguistically, between people. I was a missionary in Japan for 23 years, and all of my colleagues at Tokyo Union Theological Seminary were trained in the West. However, once they got back to Japan, they only wrote in Japanese because the demands on them were so strong that they could only write in Japanese. And the missionaries indeed used to translate some of these things, some of these writings, which are really quite significant, often back into English. And we had journals like the Japan Christian Quarterly, which I was an editor of that, and to give back to the English-speaking world and to say something from those places, not through the mediation of Western scholars. So I see this as a crying need going forward. How would you reflect on that with me? In other words, to begin to translate from some of these languages. They may be colonial languages, they may be local languages like Burmese and Thai and other languages. Significant scholarship that has been done, which we don't know about. So that's one of the areas I'm interested in.
Yeah, well, firstly, of course, that's a monumental task. And it needs lots of people working on that. And I think there are lots of people working on it. It's never going to be enough, but it is, even if you look back at what Jerry Anderson did, he edited with Tom Stransky a small group of books. Yeah. Very early on, I forget what it was called now, but everyone went and bought those little books because they were the only thing out there, translating and writings by 2/3 world scholars, putting together in books for Westerners to be able to access so that there'd be a conversation. Yeah. So the point I want to make is that the OMSC has been doing this for decades already. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is consistent with our priorities, but it is such a huge thing that I'm not sure, whatever OMSC does, we'll have to bite off a piece of it.
You're right. Absolutely.
You can't do it all. And one of the ways is that by physically having scholars from other parts of the world present together, mm-hmm. just in the task of building communities, some of these theological connections are made.
Yeah, I agree. And, one of the things I would like to do is have a feature in the IBMR every issue, or a translated article by somebody whose native language is not English. And that's one of the things I'm hoping to do. Yeah, there also the whole issue, even though there's been tremendous headway made on how women have contributed to the growth of the churches in places like Korea and other places. These stories have not adequately been told in the scholarship on Korean church history yet. They're waiting to be told by Korean women. And I've had a whole list of Korean women with PhDs telling me, we need to come to OMSC to write this up, you know. And so this is another area, not just women, but certainly voices that have not yet been able to be adequately voiced in the scholarship about how the churches were actually founded and how they grew. Not to the exclusion of men or others, but the incredibly pivotal role of women in the history of mission, which you have written about and others have written about. It's still an ongoing story. And there are many historians and theologians who are ready to write. So this is another area that I would like to develop. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's terribly exciting. A lot of women's voices are represented in these projects like Majority World Theology, which is a series of books now and things like that. But there need to be more opportunities for women to collaborate. I think that's a brilliant idea to bring women together to work on this project together at OMSC. And it fits with the history of OMSC because the founders were women.
Amen.
The money behind the OMSC was from women. The Doan sisters poured their funding into founding the houses of hospitality houses to provide furlough space for missionary families.
That's right.
And one of the unique gifts of the OMSC is and I think this goes back to the women founders, is that scholarship and practice come together through hospitality.
Amen.
That hospitality has always been one of the top several priorities of the OMSC. Mm-hmm. But that hospitality should not be seen in isolation as, oh, we're just kind of taking care of people for a while. No, yeah. It's integrated with. It provides a precondition, the relational network out of which good scholarship and practices come.
Yes.
People have to have a home in which to be comfortable enough to say, I'm trying this and it's not working. What about this little incident that may be super important, but I don't know how to process it? You know, the hospitality matrix, I think, has been one of the secrets to the superior scholarship generated by the OMSC, and that was a contribution of women, lay women.
That's right. That's right. Well, I very much want to affirm what you said, and I have recognized that. Clearly, the Doan sisters, beginning with the Doan sisters, but even all the way up through the women who have worked at OMSC to provide that hospitality over the years have made a significant and often unheralded contribution. So absolutely. So now we are embedded on the campus of one of the leading theological seminaries in the world, with tremendous resources here in Princeton for academic research, really second to none, really. And we have a new opportunity to really draw on these resources for the sake of the world church. And so looking forward, Dana, in terms of both the development of world Christianity as a discipline, but also how OMSC will now be part of the seminary community, how do you see OMSC going forward in a way that is both consistent with the past, but also, and this is really important and often the hardest part, open to the future. So just reflect with me in closing a little bit on that, if you would.
First, I want to say that historians are trained to never predict or project. And whenever they do, they make mistakes. Um, but I do want to say that it's a tremendously exciting opportunity to be embedded, in a sense, at a fine place like Princeton Seminary with its library resources and such. I would say the OMSC is going to need to work hard to retain the holistic approach to scholarship that I've just named in terms of its tradition of hospitality and generosity. Mm-hmm. Because Princeton Seminary has also been a very clerical place, a place with doctrinal fights. Okay, I'm thinking as a historian here, it's Presbyterian, right? Okay, we love Presbyterians, but as a Methodist, I need to say that I think what OMSC will keep providing is a constant reminder of holism. Mm. It is not just disembodied doctrinal scholarship. Mm-hmm. We're talking about the world Christianity as a living, breathing, organic community made up of live persons from all over the world. Mm-hmm. And OMSC is going to be the place that's constantly reminding Princeton Seminary of that. And I think that the symbiosis there is going to be great. Mm. But that'll be, I think, a challenge for OMSC, not to just become a kind of research think tank that is a typical disembodied academic think tank. Mm. To continue to be a community that represents world church. And the messiness of that is going to be something continuous with OMSC's tradition and reconfigured for the future going forward. Mm. Since OMSC has moved before, I'm confident we can accomplish this and hit the right balance, and having you in this position at this time is incredibly strategic, just as having Jerry move the group to New Haven was strategic. I think you, Tom, have all of the pieces that we all need for the leadership to do this. It's not easy, but OMSC has been changing all along the way. And this is another way, another new set of opportunities to serve.
Yeah. Fantastic. I want to give you a little bit of a little PR for OMSC. In December, Dr. Robert is going to come back and in conversation with Caleb Oladipo, she's going to be discussing her latest book, which is Faithful Friendships, Embracing Diversity in Christian Community, published last year, I believe by Erdman's, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think this is an incredibly timely book, Embracing Diversity in Christian Community. This cuts across all of the silos that we have built, constructed for ourselves. And Dana, I want to thank you for the admonition and the exhortation for OMSC. Though we are located in a Presbyterian seminary now, we will maintain our ecumenical, our evangelical, our Roman Catholic, our Pentecostal, our African Independent Church, and as well as our mainline church connections going forward. And as long as I'm around, you can be assured that broader ecumenicity will be at the center of OMSC's ethos. So we look forward to welcoming you back in December, and we look forward to Caleb examining and exploring with you your latest book. And we're excited about that time. Thank you so much for giving time today. And we ask you to say a closing word, and then we'll sign off.
No, I just want to say that as we enter this next phase, may God be with the OMSC. and all the people that OMSC is the people. And that is a great blessing. I'm optimistic and excited about the future under your leadership, Tom. And so many blessings to you and strength as you carry us all forward into our next phase of existence. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you. I've enjoyed talking about some of the incredible things that have been part of my life through the OMSC over the last 35, 40 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much.